Well, the area at the back of Tramway was just full of rubble, and there was a lot of scrag, bushes and trees. It had no real definition. There weren't really paths through it. You had to sort of clamber over bits and move about. It was an interesting place, but it wasn't inviting in any sense. I was in a band, and that band specialised in performing in abandoned industrial spaces. So we very rarely performed in concert halls. We were very, very early, doing a very early version of recycling, of finding something of value where, from a mainstream perspective, there is no value. With that background of always looking for how a location or a site might give the possibility for something new to happen, I'm much more interested in creating something out of nothing. But it's not out of nothing, because of course these sites are all the more remarkable because you can see the layers of history, remarkable layers that we discovered of the industrial history, and then you had its use as an actual location for fixing trams, and then you had a history of it as a transport museum, right the way through to its latest incarnation as an abandoned site, and then an art centre. And all of those periods of use leave traces within the landscape that, particularly with the sensitive design of Rolf Roscher and Chris Rankin of City Design Cooperative, they really picked up on the idea of building a garden using those layers and not pretending they weren't there. I've always wanted to create places and performances where the act of moving, the act of observing the world, the act of you as an audience member doing something, bringing something of yourself to the work, builds something of the narrative. And this is one of the most diverse places in Scotland. The 10 square miles around Pollock Shields and Govan Hill. I think we did over 300 face-to-face interviews with people and really began to get a feel for what a garden could represent and what it could represent within different faith systems, and how it might connect to very, very diverse traditions that historically have been against each other, or might, in community levels where there might be some tension between different people, that the garden could be a way that you could supersede some of those issues and again find the commonality of how the form of a garden has been used across almost every religious text ever written, and this is a metaphor for something good and of real profound value on earth. And then simultaneously in 2001, Britain, along with America, declared war on Iraq. I think for many people who'd come from the left, that was the great betrayal. The position that New Labour took, they had completely and utterly destroyed their bond with many of the people who put them in power. The 10 years that have come after, the amount of children and families and ordinary people whose lives have been absolutely brutalised permanently. It's an absolute human failing, and it was a political failing. They still to this day haven't really owned up to the level of betrayal and the degree to which they've unstabilised the world, and they've unstabilised the relationship between different faiths and allowed polarised positions to now flood in and dominate mainstream thinking. And so for me, the garden was a really, really concrete way to manifest a belief in what is good in humanity and what is creative and what is really worth fighting for, and what allows people to be different, allows people to follow their own faiths and what they're born into and what they choose to believe in. The point is to believe in the spirit of mutuality and equality of difference. And the garden became a beautiful metaphor, just a small, simple statement of intent that we as people can learn to live together well, and that we absolutely, wholeheartedly reject the use of armed conflict as a way of changing the world. Because the knock-on effects, the endless legacy of that is just huge psychological damage and a form of sort of spiritual divide that often takes generations to sort out. So I think all of those things swirled together. I remember this concrete idea forming in my mind that this should be a sanctuary garden. This should actually be a place dedicated to peace, that we should absolutely stand in opposition. I felt very, very, like many people, passionate and upset about what was being done in Iraq and what was being done in Britain's name. That's the negative, but the garden's something immensely positive. A lot of stuff was cleared from it, and you began to see that there were interesting pockets of nature already here. And Rolf and Chris's design was really sensitive and began to use them and build around those existing trees, and to actually use some of the rubble as mounds so you could create natural hills, but that were formed by the way that rubble had been abandoned here. And then in the bringing in of plants and the bringing in of the lawn and the large signature trees within it, it was a beautiful transformation. And I liked the fact that it was a very modern design, it was a contemporary design, but people from quite traditional backgrounds, whether they were Muslim or Sikh or Christian or Jewish or a secular background, they recognised something of themselves in the conversations we've had and how the garden had been made manifest. But actually it was a very modern design. You didn't have to make pastiches of a Mughal garden or a pastiche of a monastic garden. You could have something that had broken with those traditions and was of its own time, but that intellectually people would feel the connection with the idea of a garden and the idea of it as a place of sanctuary. And I remember the first time I heard that someone said, "Oh, my children learnt to walk in the hidden gardens," or people said, "I fell in love in the hidden gardens." And that was where it had actually become part of the social fabric of Glasgow. That was a really good moment, and that people were referring to it over time, and it's the realness of it, and it's about how people use it and how they see it and what importance it has to them. And you look at the way, for example, the planting down the side of the wall of the boiler house is so beautiful now. Just the different purples and the way the espalier trees go against the wall, and they've really grown in and taken their shape. And that, of course, looks way better than it did 10 years ago. It was just the start of the planting back then. All the planting has grown in now, and things have filled out, and it's changed, and new areas have arisen, and it just has a life. It has a life. It has a future. So that everything here is just to allow you to build your own narrative and to have your own time and find your own place within it. And even though it's a tiny place, it's really small, it's always felt bigger. It's always felt bigger than it is. Maybe it's because the ideas are bigger than the space and continue to spread outwards. In some small way, you want to leave reminders, historical reminders, that the way power politics plays out in the world is not the way ordinary people live, and it's not the way ordinary people believe and tolerate and support each other through life. So the garden is just a beautiful, simple way to allow that to happen. And what I've seen over the last 10 years is that the garden has in a very easy way allowed people to feel comfortable and allowed people of different backgrounds to feel comfortable with each other. And it's been a place that people have made their own and recognised themselves in and recognised the values of. And for that I'm very thankful.